largest single environmental disaster in the history of our country. Tragic loss of life. And yet we had a president who did not marshal every single resource at his disposal to be there to work on getting the hole filled and relief on the way. He could have done that. He could have brought every scientist from every private company who wanted to have a part to talk about how best do we solve the problem. How many days later, and it is, I mean, the pictures are just heart-wrenching to see. He should have waived the Jones Act to allow foreign countries to come in, those countries who wanted to help us. But beyond that, BP, and when you think about it, how many rigs have been drilling in the Gulf for a number of years, thousands of them, without accidents? But I will ask you this. Did BP cut corners? We know that. The investigation should be thorough, and they should be punished, and they should be held accountable. But beyond that, I ask, what about the regulators? What about the inspectors? Folks, were they doing their jobs, or were they looking the other way? And again, these are federal salaries that we are paying these folks, and it doesn't sound to me like they did their job. And could you imagine being in the private sector and having a job, an inspection or a regulatory job, and not doing it? Folks, there's so much blame to go around. I would hope this president would stand up and act with leadership and resolve to get this problem taken care of.
There's one other aspect that I think the Constitution allows the federal government to engage in. There were 11 people who lost their lives, and that has largely been forgotten in this disaster. We are focused so much on the environmental aspects of this disaster, but when there are regulations, federal laws that pertain to safety offshore, I think those laws have to be enforced. We have to do a better job of that, and we've got to hold people responsible for not doing a better job of that. Both the corporations that didn't do their job, as well as the government who should have been more involved in overseeing this process.
Questions from Jim Paff, and it's to Jane.
Jane, the Federal Communications Commission is undertaking a process presently to regulate the internet the way that it regulates private telephone companies. We have, ever since the breakup of the Bell Corporation, had an increasing competition in that market, yet still regulated and taxed to death. Everybody looks at their bill and gets very frustrated by seeing all those taxes. I know I do, and my cell phone bill and everything. Now we're going to do the same thing to the internet. In addition to the attempt to bring it under federal regulation through the FCC, in present legislation and other proposals, the Congress is seeking to give Barack Obama or any president a shut-off switch for the internet under supposed emergencies. First of all, is it appropriate at all to regulate the internet? And secondly, what specifically would you do if you agree that it should not be regulated? What specifically would you do to stop that?
Again, an incredible encroachment by the federal government. The FCC, I do not believe, should be able to regulate the internet. Again, I think it's a huge encroachment. I do think that there's areas in terms of internet pornography and those kinds of issues where there is a role to play, but not in regulation of the internet wholesale, and certainly not in concentrating additional power in this executive branch. And that's the thing that we're seeing. Think about it, folks. Banking regulations, environmental regulations. We own car companies. I mean, time and time again, this federal government is reaching into areas of our private life that were never intended for it to be in. So we have to be very vigilant in that regard, Jim, and I would not support the net neutrality issues, although they are very, very complicated. But what it does not help those businesses who've invested in the research and the technology and the structure. And so I believe that it's a dangerous proposal.
I'm opposed to having the federal government in a wholesale way regulate the internet. And I have to tell you, I think about my grandmother, who lived in Greeley most of her life, but she actually moved from Oklahoma to Kansas when she was a kid in a covered wagon. And I sat with her and watched a man walk on the moon. You know, think about how far we have come in this country from the time of that kind of transportation to now the information transportation that we're involved in. The reason the internet is so great is because the federal government has not stifled the innovation that is in that process. And if we allow the federal government to regulate the internet, we will certainly stifle that type of innovation, and we will again lose jobs and lose the cutting edge that we have now to foreign countries. The other thing that I fear, when we allow the government to start regulating the internet, how much speech do they regulate? Yeah. I don't trust the federal government. Look what they try to do with the fairness doctrine on the radio. We're going to trust the internet. We're going to trust the internet to the federal government? No. I am incredibly concerned about the federal government's encroachment in that area.
I think maybe let's do 3 questions more from the panel. That'll end us with a question to Ken. Then we'll wrap up with the closing statements, if that's okay with everybody. So the next question then would be from Michelle, and it will be to Ken.
I'm going to ask the question you don't want asked. This won't be the jerk question. This will just be the one you don't want to talk about. On August 11th, you're going to wake up and one of you is going to be the winner, and one of you is going to have to make a choice. You've each got some really passionate followers supporting you and campaigning for you, and it's a very passionate race, very heated. On August 11th, will you endorse and support with your full efforts and resources the other candidate to ensure a Republican victory in November and a victory for freedom?
Yes. I have to tell you, the exchange of views here sometimes gets negative. And it is hardest on our families, and that's what I feel bad about. Jane and I think through the years have developed thick skin, and we can take what we are talking about. Mike Norton hired me at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I started February 26, 1990. I remember that date because it was awful important to me to get to Colorado, where I've been trying to get for a long time. We send the Nortons a Christmas card every 10 years, folks. I'm sorry. I misspoke. For the last 10 years, we have sent them. Jane has seen my children go from about this high to this high. Well, Cody's not taller than me, so he's about that high. But we are friends, and when this is over, we will be friends. And I can tell you, I will stand shoulder to shoulder with Jane, regardless of what happens, and we will kick Michael Bennett's butt.